The Beginnings of Tynemouth by Gary Holland. Tynemouth is a place that is steeped in history. The town has seen invasions by the Romans and Vikings, 2 world wars, a civil war, the Reformation during the reign of Henry VIII, and has had settlements going back to the ancient Britons and the Stone Age. 2 previous Penbal posts have discussed the meaning of the name of the village and the name of the river. But in the written age, what is the first mention of the town of Tynemouth? This post highlights the earliest records of the name. The map presented above shows towns and rivers throughout Britain with their respective Saxon place names. Written in Old English, the map shows a rare spelling of Tynemouth, Tynemouth, which includes the long-gone letter eth. Today, the letter eth has long since disappeared from our alphabet, and instead we describe the sound using th. The Tyne is named Tynan because of the dative case in Old English, where an is added to nouns to indicate the recipient of an action, in this instance meaning that which dissolves or disperses. As well as Tynemouth, the map shows other local descriptions such as Bebanbur, Bamborough and Durham. The map in these pictures, Britannia Saxonica, despite having ancient spellings, is only around 300 years old and would have, more than likely, originally been part of a book. The Northumberland Assizes Roll of 1225 will also likely reference Tynemouth, as will the Tynemouth Chartulary of 1320 held at Alnwick Castle, but a full digital version of either was unavailable at this time. An older mention of Tynemouth is captured in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The Chronicle is essentially not one single document, but variations of differing copies created through the 8th to 12th centuries at different locations. Written in Old English on parchment, they are an extremely important set of documents and a bridge between the Roman and Norman periods. There are only a few hundred documents in existence that are written in Old English, so it's fascinating that they have survived for so long. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the spelling of Tynemouth is slightly different, spelt as Tymanmuth. This appears in an entry for the year 792, describing the body of King Osred at Tynemouth. The entry for just 2 years later, 794, describes a Viking raid on Jarrow. This version of the Chronicle is thought to have been written around the 11th century. In the screenshot above, I've highlighted Tynemouth in yellow and, for interest, Northumbria in green. The Old English text is as follows, translated, quote, "This year Offa, king of Mercia, commanded that King Ethelbert should be beheaded, and Osred, who had been king of the Northumbrians, returned home after his exile, and was apprehended and slain on the 18th day before the calends of October. His body is deposited at Tynemouth, Ethelred this year, on the 3rd day before the calends of October." End quote. This post cannot be complete without discussing the works of the Venerable Bede, 672 to 735, the father of English history. Bede wrote many documents in his life, but the 2 which mention Tynemouth are his Life of Saint Cuthbert, written around the year 716, and then the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, written around 731. The Life of Saint Cuthbert describes miracles performed by the patron saint of Northumbria, Cuthbert, 634 to 687, one of the most renowned early Christian monks who served as Bishop of Lindisfarne. The historian H.H.E. Craster, in History of Northumberland 1907, page 38, recounts a famous section of Bede's text. Unfortunately, it suggests that the people of Tynemouth actually mocked some seafarers who were having trouble landing after landing their rafts in a storm. Quote, "The first appearance of Tynemouth in history is in the early days of Christianity in the north. A countryman who saw the scene told the story to a monk of Jarrow, who in turn described it to Bede. It occurred in the middle of the 7th century. At South Shields, a double monastery was being built by St. Hild. A party of monks had gone up the Tyne to bring timber from the woods, which then shaded the riverbanks. The rafts with their cargo were brought safely back, but off South Shields a wind set up from the west. A landing was impossible. With wind and tide against them, the monks were driven out to sea. Their comrades put out in boats from Shields, but the weather prevented them from giving any assistance. They gathered on the law and knelt in prayer. But meanwhile, a large crowd had gathered on the northern shore. Their thoughts were not prayerful, for they jeered at the 5 rafts, which now looked no larger than so many seagulls riding the waves. The monks were getting their deserts, they said, for trampling upon the laws of nature and setting up new and unheard of standards of life. Saint Cuthbert was among the crowd. He was only a lad, but he tried to shame them, saying, "Why curse those who, as you see, are being drawn to their death? Is it not better and kinder to pray to the Lord for their safe return than to be glad of their danger?" But they turned on him angrily and cried, "Let no man pray for them. May God have mercy upon never a one of them. They have taken away our old services, and no one knows how these new forms ought to be kept." Then Cuthbert knelt down and laid his face to the earth, and, as he prayed, the wind shifted and brought the rafts back to land. So the monks reached the Durham shore unharmed. The crowd was abashed. They admired the young man for his boldness, and, when he came to be famous, the story of his deed was often told by those who then had stood upon the Tynemouth cliffs. End quote. Oxford University hold a copy of this book from the first half of the 12th century, while a later manuscript dating from the latter part of the 12th century is held by the British Library and contains 2 illustrations of the story as well as mention of the River Tyne, Fluminis Tinni. However, the oldest surviving manuscript of the life of St Cuthbert dates from the mid-1930s, Corpus Christi College, Cambridge, MS 183. Similarly, the text states, "Ab ostio Tinni Fluminis," from the mouth of the Tyne River. Bede's most famous work was the ecclesiastical history of the English people. The image above is from a copy written in the late 8th or early 9th century. Bede, writing at Jarrow, makes mention of Tynemouth insomuch as the monastery next to the mouth of the River Tyne, or in Latin, Monasterio quod est juxta ostium Tinni Fluminis. This is one of the earliest copies of his famous book, and is quite possibly the oldest surviving mention of Tynemouth, as well as the earliest mention of the monastery at Tynemouth. The text reads as follows: "Nor do I think that this miracle, which Haribold, the servant of Christ, says was wrought upon himself by the bishop, is to be passed over in silence. He was then one of the bishop's clergy, but now presides as abbot in the monastery at the mouth of the River Tyne. Living with him, said he, and being very well acquainted with his course of life, I found it to be in all points worthy of a bishop, as far as it is lawful for men to judge." End quote. Since this passage discusses the monastery at the mouth of the Tyne, it is presumably on Penbal Crag, and a precursor to the ruined priory that we see today. It is known that a Saxon church existed there, and fragments of Saxon stone have occasionally been found. From this statement, we can only assume that a collection of houses did exist in Tynemouth in the vicinity of the monastery, but perhaps were not enough to be considered a village in themselves. In summary, the first mention of Tynemouth, or the mouth of the River Tyne, was written by Bede in the life of Saint Cuthbert, but since no original versions are known to exist, it appears the 8th century manuscript of Bede's History of the English People, held by the British Museum, is the oldest surviving record we have of Tynemouth in history.